Spanning the globe to bring you the constant variety of art, it's the Tenet Podcast. I'm Todd Pearson, coming to you from the 40 West Arts District in Lakewood, Colorado, and joining me from his podcast studio in Rapid City, South Dakota, my co-host, Wes Brown.
Todd, how you doing, my friend? Oh my God, it's another week.
It's another week.
And as we record this, it's the first primary of the season. So for all those people that are looking forward to the political season, we're kicking it off today with New Hampshire. Iowa doesn't count because it's a caucus. Nobody counts caucuses. So anyway.
I think
that's how we all feel.
Yeah. I think I just got a little acid reflux.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to eat a Tums.
I got a feeling Tums is going to make a lot of money this year because I'm going to go through a bunch of them too. So anyway, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good. The weather has gone back to being very Colorado seasonal, 40s, right. Upper 40s.
We're in the grips 50s. Of global warming again. That's the beautiful thing. So I'll take it.
Is South Dakota, shaking itself out? Is it cold or is it?
Oh no, it's back up in like we had 50 something yesterday, and then like 30s and 20s the weekend. Well, and then we were like down into like single digits for a while, but yeah, back into the 40s and 50s up in the banana belt of the Dakotas, and so it's really nice. And I know the Marshall Islands and getting hammered with tidal waves, and San Diego just had the most rain they've had in one day in over 100 years.
Oh, wow.
So global warming is here. We have to embrace it. But as of today, I'm taking it because it's like 47 today. So I love it.
Nice. Right on. Yeah. Too early to get spring fever though.
Yes. And we know like next week could be, hell freezing over. It could be 20 below. So we just got to take it while we can get it. So
heck yeah. All right. Well, let's kick this thing off.
Let's do it, man.
Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can always find out what we're up to via our social media on Instagram at Tenet Podcast, our Tenet Podcast Facebook page, and of course, our website, tenetpodcast.com. Back in December, I had the pleasure of experiencing our next guest's work in person as part of Guardians of Feral Lands at Keel Fine Art down in Trinidad, Colorado. And I was absolutely blown away, as I'm sure you will be too. You can check out her amazing work at our website, KristenEgan.com, and you can follow her on Instagram at KristenEganArt. Kristen, how are you?
Hi, I'm excellent. Thanks so much for inviting me on the podcast.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. Hey, when do you guys have your primary?
I don't even know.
There we go. That's the right attitude to have. We don't know. We don't even care.
I'm just really unhappy about all of it. So
ours is in June. And so, by the time South Dakota comes around, it's all a done deal anyway. So anyway, it is what it is, right? So
I might be wrong. So yeah. Last time we had a primary, by the time we got to it, the people I wanted to vote for weren't on the ballot anymore. So.
Yeah. That's the way South Dakota is too. Yeah, it's always, and we have like 2 electoral votes. So like even in the fall, it's like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
We'll throw our 2 in.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we don't have to talk about that. I was just on the news tonight, so I thought I would ask.
There, I should know.
No.
We'll pretend like I'm more on top of it.
Yeah, that's all right. No, we just don't want to talk about it. That's all.
Yeah.
And I don't blame you at all.
Not at all. Not at all. Todd, save us.
Okay. I've read your work described in various ways, Kristen. Contemporary folk art, new contemporary, lowbrow pop surrealism. Take a moment and describe to our listeners what kind of work you do and how you describe what you do and the materials that you work with.
Yeah, this is always a tough one because I feel like my work stretches across a few different genres. So at the very basic level, I usually just describe myself as a mixed media artist who specializes in sculpture and sculptural masks and occasionally illustration. So the gallery terminology, it's funny, I was actually just talking about this with somebody else. I've made a really lucky connection early on with a gallery in Philadelphia called Arch Enemy Arts. And I've been showing with them basically since they opened in like 2012. And there is sort of a network of galleries, all independent, but they all show similar styles of work and a lot of the same artists. You can find them in various combinations in a lot of those galleries. And the style of work, which I at the time sort of only partially fit into, but a lot of galleries, it's easier to get into if you do sculpture because they're looking for sculpture to mix it up because they're like overloaded with paintings. And I used to do more like floor pieces. Now I do a lot more wall hanging sculpture, but they were always desperate for like pedestal pieces. So I sort of was able to slip into these places where it kind of straddles the line between like illustration and fine art. So image-based work, usually very realistic, maybe kind of like fantasy or surreal, just not like abstract work. And my sculpture, I think, can kind of tend that way. It has sort of like a cartoony, illustrative character feel sometimes, but also like, I think it is a little bit folk arty in some ways, just purely because of the materials that I'm using, because I use a lot of wood. I use gourds, which is kind of a weird thing to find in a fine art gallery, but that sort of evolved over. I really like wood carving, but it's really impractical to do wood carving and sell it because of the time constraints and the physical demand that it takes. Like my hands are killing me after I spend hours doing a wood carving. So gourds have a similar look and you can use a lot of similar materials and they blend with wood really well. But gourds are very much a traditional like folk art kind of craft material. So the galleries that I'm in, when it started off, they described lowbrow pop surrealism was like this mouthful of trying to describe that sort of like illustration-y surrealist realism that they were showing. And I think because it just sounds like so awkward and ridiculous, over the last couple years, it has shifted to, they just describe it as new contemporary. And then a lot of times I think of my art kind of becoming a little bit more of like the folk art kind of shamanic sort of like concepts to it. But contemporary folk art, I think, is still a little bit more traditional than what I'm doing. So I've been sort of calling it new contemporary folk art, if that makes sense, kind of like meshing up those two worlds of styles. But yeah, it's always hard to pinpoint exactly what to call it. I think I usually ended up just reverting to showing people pictures of it, because if you say I make masks out of gourds, you're not going to picture what it looks like.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you definitely won't.
Yeah.
And they have a ton of gourd festivals recently. And I'm trying to remember where it was at, but there was it might've been on CBS Sunday Morning or whatever. They were talking to this place that has this big gourd garden, so to speak. And they do a big festival every year. Are you familiar with those?
There's a big gourd farm in California. I think it's called Wellburn Gourd Farm.
Okay.
There's actually one, Pennsylvania has a really big one, Smucker's Gourds. It's an Amish farm, actually, and it's maybe like not quite an hour south of where I live. I live in like the central southeast part of Pennsylvania, so it's this really interesting kind of regional, like you have Philadelphia, and then you go up a little bit and you're into like Amish country, and then where I went to high school, it's sort of like Amish, and then it kind of like goes up into like Pennsylvania Dutch, and then go north on the other side of the mountains, and then it's like the Eastern coal region. So like that's where my parents are from, like all the Irish, Italian, Polish coal miner immigrant. But the nice thing is there's like tons of farms, and Smucker's is like a huge Amish farm that pretty much, I mean, I'm sure they grow other stuff too, but it's just a huge pole building with like every size gourd you could imagine. And they're already cleaned and dried, which is like a huge part of the labor already done. So I usually just go down there with a wad of cash and a bunch of garbage bags and like load my car until it's completely full and then come back when I run out. So, but there's another one too. There's a really, I think, more well-known one in Ithaca, New York, called Gourdlandia. I know they've been featured on like news promos and
Yeah,
stuff.
that might be the one I'm thinking of. And they have a big festival where people can paint on them. And
People like parade down the streets, like wearing them and stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
You probably find more places that grow them actually down south and out west because it's a plant that needs a very long period of uninterrupted sunlight. So the Northeast is actually not really like the ideal growing conditions for them. Like the ones that you can buy from that farm in California, the walls of the gourds are like, some of them are like an inch thick. Like they just get a lot bigger and more solid. Like sometimes here you can get that too. It partially depends on the seed variety, but I think you find it as a more common like plant in like warmer climates. So traditionally, like historically, they were used all around the world, but I think most famously in places like South America and Egypt and like warmer climates. So
Sure. So do you grow your own gourds too, or do you just buy them from the Amish?
I used to grow them. When I lived at my parents' house, we had a big trellis and we would plant vines over it and I would grow them. But I live in the woods and anything I plant, if it gets enough sunlight, just gets eaten by everything. So it's I can try all summer to get a couple little scraggly ones, or I can just drive down to the farm and load up with like all different amazing sizes. So plus when you grow them yourself, it's several months before they dry out. You can't use them when they're fresh. You have to wait for them to dry and it becomes like this hard shell. And someone asked me, I don't know why. It's like for some reason a pumpkin will rot, but a gourd will harden and all of the insides just kind of turn into paper and seed, like the seeds just dry out. But when the plant, like it grows on the vine, and when I was growing them, the vines die off in the fall, and then you just leave it out there all winter. And then in the spring, when you come out to plant the next year, the old ones are dried out enough, but they have all this like kind of crusty, flaky skin on the outside. So then you have to dip them in water and take one of those like metal pot scrubbers and like scrape all of that kind of dried, crusty stuff off the surface. And it's not hard, but like it's an added step that takes a couple hours. And if you let it soak in the water too long, you can accidentally like put your finger through the shell when it'll soften and then harden again. So it's nice to just have somewhere that I can actually go and like they're just ready to use. So it's totally worth it, especially as the demand has grown and I just have so many shows coming up. I don't think I could grow as many as I would need to for the amount of work that I've been making. So I would probably have to start making them out of paper mache or something else.
And you just convinced me if I was ever to get into gourd mask making, I would just go buy them because I don't have the patience to grow. So there we go.
I mean, and it's funny because it's like, yeah, you get all excited when you grow them and then you're like, oh, I can't use this till next year. So you'll have to really plan ahead.
So the gourds, isn't that what the Native Americans use for rattles too? Like,
yeah,
because of the seed?
You'll see it in Native Americans will use them for rattles. You can make other instruments too. Even like, I know in India, I don't know what it's called. It's a stringed instrument.
Yep.
I mean, and even in like Appalachian, like American folk music, they make banjos and fiddles out of them. Actually, what's really cool is they predate ceramics. So way, way, way back ancient history, like before people learned how to fire pottery, and even after, like they were used as canteens and like food and water vessels and bowls and cups. And I mean, they still are. Like there's I don't know what it's called, like the yerba mate cups down in Brazil, like are made out of gourds still, like traditionally. So, but it's cool when you look at like ancient pre-Columbian ceramics. I saw a few examples of bowls that were indented on the bottom. And the theory is like, there's no real practical reason why there would be an indent on the bottom other than that. That's what, if you cut the bottom of a gourd off and used it like a bowl, it has that kind of indent the same way that a pumpkin does. So if people were just for hundreds of thousands of years using gourds as dishes, then when you think of like, what's the shape of a bowl? That's the shape. So then when they started making them in ceramics, they were just mimicking like the shape of a gourd. And you can see, and a lot of like the sculptural like vessels and vases, they have very similar shapes. So it's kind of a cool, like historical, and also it's neat because like you can find gourd masks and musical instruments in almost every country and culture, like at some point in history. It's really like very universally human. Kind of like the mask making, I think, which is what's really appealing.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And the whole bowl thing totally makes sense. If that's what you've been experiencing, and then all of a sudden you're firing, like you said, you're going to create something that you already realize. So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
or
And
recognize.
I don't, someone could probably fact check me on this, but I think there's a similar style of pottery in Egypt, and the way the color of the glaze is put on, again, it's because when they were made out of gourds, they like carbonized them a certain way. So like that's just like when people are like, oh, it's like bowls are that color. So then when they were doing them in a different material, they were still mimicking a gourd, basically, which I
Yeah,
think was interesting. Yeah.
yeah, that's very interesting.
So do you source gourds when you travel? Do you look for them? Do you hunt them
Um,
out?
I don't, because usually, I mean, I haven't really done a lot of like art travels. Usually when I travel, it's to get out of the studio and to like not do art for a while. If anything, when I travel, I have sometimes taken masks with me and done photo shoots. Like on Instagram, I do a lot of photos where I'm wearing the finished mask like outside somewhere. So I definitely have done trips where like I've taken them to the beach and done like a photo shoot like at the ocean, but I haven't actually sourced materials. But it actually has come up because I think it would be fun to do a residency, and I've had some friends like go abroad and do residencies, and it does become an issue because they're really bulky. I'd have to pre-cut them so they could all be like cleaned and stacked, but I have run into issues like with customs, even like shipping finished sealed work. So like transporting raw gourds internationally, I feel like there might be like customs issues with that. But you can't get them in some places. So I have to really think about that. If I do try to do a residency somewhere, what am I going to actually work on? Can I actually? So I actually have been starting to play around with doing some ceramic versions, but I have a big learning curve there. So we're not there yet.
I think it's fascinating, and unless you're doing that kind of work, the average person is not going to think about any of this stuff, right? I mean, it's just second nature to you because these are materials that you use all the time. You know where to go get them, you know how to source them. But yeah, I didn't even think about the fact that if you were to do a residency somewhere, wherever it may be, you got to take into account like how are you going to get your materials there, or if it's an option or if there's going to be issues. That's yeah.
When I was in art school in college, there were a couple projects we did where it was all about like sense of place, how you convey that in your work. And we have a friend who's a potter who lives nearby, and he has a big like Japanese style wood fire kiln, and he makes his own clay, like digs it up, and he always loves to talk to me about that like sense of place in your artwork. And I really didn't think about that. Like it's not really a part of my concept, but as I've developed this very specific style and body of materials, like it is completely 100% tied to place because I go to the gourd farm to get the gourds, and then 90% of the time the wood, when I'm doing antlers or ears or carving things, I'm pulling the wood from the woods outside of my house. So there are a lot of mountain laurels around here, so I use mountain laurels for the antlers. So I'll go out on a hike and do like a wood gathering day where there's very specific things that I'm looking for. Like it has to be dead, but it can't be laying on the ground because then it's wet. So I have to like harvest the still standing dead branches. Yeah, so a lot of the materials are very specifically found around my house. So I guess like from that technical standpoint, like it is extremely sense of place oriented, which is I think really cool, but it is also very limiting when you want to go somewhere else and work on it.
Right.
And to give reference to like the area that you live in, it's pretty diverse as far as the fauna, right?
Yeah, it's I was on another podcast, someone was asking me like, "Oh, what do you like about living here?" And I sort of just am here because this is where I grew up, and I thought at some point I would move away, but it is actually like a really gorgeous area, just scenic and like biodiversity wise. Like we have it's eastern deciduous forests. We're in the Appalachian Mountains. Literally, the Appalachian Trail is right across the street. If you walked up the hill, you'd be on the Appalachian Trail. And then it's surrounded by farmland. There's a spring that comes right up out of the ground a quarter mile up the trail from my house. Like it is like a very diverse ecosystem as far as plant and animal life. So that also, I think, is a big inspiration. A lot of my work, the animals that I'm depicting, but then often too, a lot of times the designs that I'm painting on the animals or the colors that I'm using often are very much inspired by what happens to be in bloom or what I'm seeing outside the window while I'm working on it. So like I did one mask a couple years ago and it was this yellow, like kind of very abstracty kind of deer. But it had these almost like quilt star, like 8-point white star motifs on them. And that was like I was on a hike looking for a place to photograph another mask. And there was this teeny little perfect white flower growing on the trail. And that was the shape of the petals of the flower. And it was just like such a sharp, distinctive shape. So then like I did that mask. I went back to the house and I painted that design all over the mask. So I'm pulling a lot of designs just, and so like if you looked at it, you probably wouldn't say it's a flower. It just kind of looks like an abstract kind of star shape, but I wouldn't have made it in that shape had I not seen that flower. So
roughly, what town do you live in, if you don't mind, or near?
Yeah, the main town that's closest to my house is Hamburg, Pennsylvania, which
Okay.
I'm about a half an hour, 40 minutes north of Reading, Pennsylvania, which
okay.
People would know that as the Reading Railroad on the Monopoly board, but it is the Reading Railroad. You shared your screen with the picture of the mask. That is the one I was talking about. So
yeah, I was going to ask you if that was the mask.
It is. Yeah, that's exactly the one. Good eye.
Well, the reason I kind of saved this beforehand because this is one of my favorite masks I think that I've seen of yours. There's something about it that's just, I don't know, it's just striking. It's arresting and it really made me stop and look at it. I got a new term for what you do. How about new pagan contemporary?
Oh, I like that a lot.
Does that work?
Yeah, that's amazing.
New pagan contemporary.
I'll take it. Yeah. That one was really cool because again, like some of the style, it's my sculpting choices. And then some of it is just like, what materials do I happen to have available? And the antlers that are on this one are angled in such a way, you can sort of see at the very tip, the antler, instead of it being just a single spine, it kind of widens out into like a forked U shape. And the way that they're twisted, I spun one around so it was facing backwards. So they're like almost touching. So it creates this cool little energy point at the top of the head. And then all the little black circles on the face are actually all drilled out. So those are all holes that you can see through. But I really liked this actual photo. I thought turned out really cool.
Those look like real antlers. That's amazing.
They are real antlers.
Oh, they are. Okay. Well, that's why they look like real antlers then.
They look very realistic. Yeah. I sometimes use real antlers. I sometimes use sticks that I just peel the bark off of. Sometimes I'll carve antlers, but that's a lot more labor intensive. It is funny though, because it used to be that the masks that I had real antlers on would always be the most popular ones that sold right away. And the last show that I did, they were like the only pieces that didn't sell right away. So
oh, wow.
Interesting
to see how things shift.
So do you have a theory of why that was?
I don't know. I mean, it could have just been the mask more than the antlers. I do think that they weren't necessarily the most interesting like faces that I sculpted out of the whole batch, but it used to be like, oh, if it's not that good, you can stick antlers on it. And then people will be like, oh, it's got antlers. It's extra cool. But people aren't falling for that anymore, I guess.
So you kind of talked about the design as far as the flower that you saw, that you made these little starbursts in, and that there's holes to see out of, and it gives you interest inside the stars. So this deer head, gourd head, has one eye, or maybe there's more, but one prominent eye in the middle. So talk about how you came up with this idea. What was the impetus for that?
It has evolved over time. This one, it actually does have two eyes on either side. You can't really see it straight on. when I first started making masks, I took a class in college. So like way back, I took a class and it was called The Art of Transformation. And it was all about masks and tattoos and scarification and any kind of body modification that had like a transformative element. And the textbook for the class was just this huge coffee table book of gorgeous like full color photos. And it was neat because it organized the masks by not by culture or by time period, but it was like by their function. So it was like coming of age ceremonies or theater or battle. So you could see like side by side, it was like very anachronistic. Like you'd see like a Darth Vader mask next to like some kind of ancient African tribal mask next to something like some like Balinese dance mask. So it was really wild. And I just got totally fascinated like by masks as art objects. And I was painting pictures of them because I was doing a lot more like 2D work at that point. And then after college, I was getting more into sculpture. I was trying to find materials that were practical to work with. I realized that you could cut a gourd in half and it was basically like a pre-made mask and you didn't have to do very much to it. And the early ones that I made, even this one you can see is still sort of on the earlier end where there's not a lot of sculpting on it. It's relatively smooth other than like the eyes and the nose. And the surface treatment was just all about like the painting. And at the time, the first ones I did, they just had two eyes and they were like pretty straightforward. And then I got out of doing masks for a while because I started making these little three-legged, like small sculptures. I call them totems. They're sort of like little kind of like fetish figurine objects. And I started sculpting those and really kind of started developing my style a little bit more as far as like some of them it started out as like I would do like there would be like two animal faces stacked on top of each other, and then that sort of evolved over time. Instead of having a bunch of faces, it would be like two different sets of eyes, but they were sharing a nose, and then there'd be like another face on top of it, and then it just got condensed into just like there's just a bunch of eyes and they all just have one face. And so I was doing all this on sculptures. And then I revisited the mask making like a few years later. And then suddenly the masks were like much more about the sculpting and that more evolved style than they were about the painting before. So that's when I started adding extra eyes to the masks. And the masks were basically like blown up versions of the little tiny sculptures I was making. So I sort of have this grab bag option. Like when I'm doing a mask, it's either going to have two eyes, like more traditional. It's going to have two eyes and a third eye. Sometimes the two eyes are painted and the third eye is the only one you can see out of, or vice versa. Or I'll stack, it'll have like maybe two or three sets of eyes stacked. Or I started doing this sort of like compound eye thing where I'll have like a whole bunch of little eyes cut out and it almost creates like a screen that you see through, which that I figured out kind of from doing things like I did on that yellow mask where I drilled a bunch of holes into it randomly and it kind of creates like a cool visual effect from the inside. But I think doing the multiple eyes on the animals, because the masks sort of grew out of like these are life-size versions of the totems. So it's like when I'm making a mask of a deer, like I'm not like picturing it as this is an individual physical animal. It's more like this is a representation of this like kind of like totemic idea of a deer. This is a sculpture or an idea. It's not like an animal, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So I think having the multiple eyes, depending on like which set of eyes that you're focusing on, the face still works, but it kind of changes the expression because they'll be like spread far apart or closer together. Or then in the ones where it's a bunch of little tiny compound eyes, it's almost like the animal was moving. So depending on which angle you're looking at it, you're seeing the eyes like in a different position, kind of almost like in Slaughterhouse-5 when there's those aliens that can see. They don't see you as you are now. They see you as you exist at all moments in time. So it's kind of like that like motion to it, I guess, if that makes sense. And also some of them, it makes them actually more functional to wear. Functionality is not really the driving goal behind the design of them, but sometimes obviously when there's more holes in them, they're easier to see out of.
Right.
They're all incredibly cool. And
Thank you.
yeah, I'm gonna pull up a mask real quick that you were just kind of talking about some of the various characteristics. This one's called Luna, and actually this is
Yes.
on your website. Talk a little bit about this if you would.
Sure. Yeah, this is actually a tiny one. I always take for granted that I know how big they are, but I sometimes wonder if people think that like this mask is probably only 3 inches high. So, but the fun thing about them is, whatever size they are, like the technique is pretty much the same. This particular piece was part of my solo show that I did this past September at Arch Enemy Arts. And the theme of that show was the Wheel of the Year, which is kind of like the pagan druidic calendar, like Celtic, like solar calendar. So basically like the seasons of the year, the idea that it's just like it's the cyclical cycle, and that there are holidays that mark the solstices and the equinoxes, and then the halfway points between the solstices and the equinoxes, and kind of just really being in the moment and celebrating like the season and the environment, and having your lifestyle kind of work in accordance with the growing seasons and the resting seasons and that kind of a thing. So in the show, the work was laid out in a line on the wall, but I do have a photo, I think, on my Instagram page where they're laid out in a circle. So the idea was I selected animals, and then the colors and the designs that I painted on the animals were all very specific to like the seasons of the year. And I also just made a ton of rabbits last year because it was the year of the rabbit. So there was a couple gallery shows that were rabbit themed. And there are definitely some animals in my work that are sort of like recurring characters. So I try to change it up and do different ones now and then, but like I always do deer, wolf slash coyote slash fox, rabbits, owls, bears. So they're kind of these like families. And I've gotten to the point where I'll go to the gourd farm and I know exactly like, okay, if this is the shape of a gourd I need for a bear snout, this is the shape of a gourd I need for a wolf snout. The rabbits and the owls and like the feline faces are kind of nice because they're more flat with like a very understated snout. So those masks usually end up being like the back end of a gourd that I cut off. So you can usually get two masks out of one piece, especially on these tiny ones. But yeah, so this one, Luna, was part of the winter section of the show. So, it's very kind of like white and frosty. Just kind of thinking about like a little bunny hopping around in the moonlight on across the snow. So that's kind of where like the aesthetic color choices come from. And then it is interesting too, because like especially in that show, because there were like 41 pieces in that show, I think, which is a lot to do as one series. And what happens when I make work, I'm usually working on a whole bunch of pieces all at once. So there is sort of like a production aspect to it where I'll have 10 pieces and I'll cut all the gourds, and then I'll do all the wood carving, and then I'll glue them all together. So by the time I finish the last one, the first one's dry, and then I'll kind of run through the sculpting and the painting. So I'm making 10 or more pieces at once almost all the time. So when I made this mask, I think there was a couple small rabbit masks in that show. There were also a bunch of real small little like freestanding rabbit sculptures. So it's kind of like, I'll batch them all together and be like, okay, we're doing rabbits today. And then I just kind of run through like all the different variations of like what you can do on a rabbit face. So they're all similar, but slightly different. I don't think I could make them all exactly the same, even if I wanted to, but it kind of gives it this unified feel, but you get to see all these weird little like variations between the different ones. And that goes for like, all the other animals too. But said I did a lot of rabbits last year.
So this is hand carved. The texture of the hair is all hand carved using traditional like carving utensils like you would for wood.
It's a combination of things. So the process that I use, I obviously don't have any kind of copyright on crafting with gourds or mask making at all, but the kind of very specific way that I make them, I haven't really seen anybody else do, and it was kind of largely self-taught. Actually, it was inspired by, I went to one of those gourd festivals like that you were talking about, how they have the like at the farm way back, like when I was in high school. And most of the time when you see people crafting with gourds, they're very like kind of kitschy, folky stuff, or birdhouses, or like Santa Claus faces wood burned onto a gourd. And this lady that was vending a booth, and she was they were lamp bases that were made out of gourds, and they were Santa Claus faces, but she, instead of just painting it, had sculpted the nose onto it, so the nose like stuck out and was 3D. And that was the light bulb of like, you can build onto them, like it's not just a thing, like it's an armature. And then, that took a lot of years for me to go from that to where I'm at now. But I will carve elements out of solid wood. So like the ears on this rabbit are solid wood strips that I cut out on the bandsaw, put into a little clamp, use the chisel to carve out the inside. So it's a straight up wood carving. Then I glue that into the gourd, and then the face I actually use, depends on the piece, various kinds of air drying clay. Usually it's air drying paper clay, which is essentially, it's like paper mache, but it's ground up so fine that you can sculpt it like clay. It's not like laying paper mache strips on something. Sometimes I'll use epoxy clay if I need to make something bigger or stronger. But then what I'll do is I'll actually kind of build up like the eyes and the cheekbones and the snout with the paper clay. And then while it's still wet, it is a wood carving knife, but I'm actually drawing the fur into the clay like while it's still wet, which is a lot easier, and you can get a lot smoother gesture than if you're dry carving something that's hard, which you can do, but it's much slower. And if you mess it up, it's a lot harder to fix. There's definitely times where I've done like the fur pattern over the entire side of a face and then decided I didn't like the way that the lines were flowing and just like smoothed it all out and did it again. So it's a pain in the butt, but you can do it. So it's a lot more forgiving. Yeah. I used to just paint the fur. So my old pieces, pre 2015, they would just be smooth, like gourd surface, and the fur was all like painted on. But I haven't done that in a very long time. And I think the sculpting just looks a lot better. And that's kind of like why I got into gourds, because you can, like, it looks like, and a lot of times, unless I show people like, oh, this is actually clay, this is wood, it all looks like wood carving. So I think you get that aesthetic. Yeah.
Yeah, I just assumed it was all that. I knew, like, from watching or looking at your Instagram, that you had carved ears and horns and stuff like that. But yeah, so it's really cool. And then there's like a leather attachments on the side, right? Those are leather.
Yeah, usually leather. One show I ran out of leather and desperately went through my closet and pulled out everything that I had with the drawstrings. So one show it was like the night before I had to drop it off, and I sacrificed all my like pants drawstrings, and they were so I had cotton straps on one show. But
that's awesome. And then this one had the bell. So talk about the bell. How did you add that, or why did you add that?
Yeah, the bells are fun. So going way back to that class that I took in college that was about mask making, one of the elements that I thought was really interesting is that a lot of masks in different, all different cultures, they were meant to be used in ceremonies, and they were meant to be seen by firelight, and not, it was meant to be kind of mysterious. In a lot of cultures, only certain people are even allowed to touch the masks or really see them up close. So there's a lot of kind of like mystery and mystique around them. And a lot of the patterns that are painted on the masks are designed in such a way that when they're in firelight, they kind of look like they're moving or flickering. So, watching somebody dance around a fire with a mask on versus seeing it hanging in a glass case in a museum, not only is the context of where you're viewing it different, but like the visuals are actually different, because it's like it's dead, like it's not, there's, it's taken out of its element. So the second show that I ever did at Arch Enemy Arts was when I started making big masks again for the first time in a long time. And I wanted and that was the first time I took like a photo of me wearing it outside. So I wanted to kind of like show, like, before it's hanging on a white wall, here's what it looks like in the wild. And I wanted to use that photo for the postcard, but the gallery didn't want to. I think because they thought people would be confused as to like, is this a photograph or is it a sculpt? Like, what's the art? So they just wanted like the mask on the white wall because that's what they had to sell. So I was like, well, I get that, but it's losing this other context that I want it to have. And if we're not going to be able to display photographs in the show, like, how am I going to convey that sense of motion and I mean, even though they're still photos, but they're in an environment, like, you can tell, like, it's like something that exists in the world versus like a flat thing hanging on the wall. So my solution to that was to hang strings of bells across them, because if you see a thing with a bunch of bells on it, it's not moving, but you know that if you did move it, it would do something. So it's sort of like, it's showing you that, like, it's meant to be moved, because if it moves, it will become more dynamic and something will happen. So the bells were sort of like the way to imply that it was meant to do more than hang on the wall. If that makes sense.
Yeah,
and then
no.
it also became like part of my kind of like aesthetic lexicon of designs that I use. So I think the first ones that I did, it would just be like a string of bells hanging across the horns or hanging kind of like under the neck, like a necklace. And then I started playing around with, when I would order the bells, a lot of them come from India and they come with like little strings of like colored string. So I was just using what came with them. But then I started buying embroidery floss and like making my own color combos for the strings. So especially on some of the smaller like totem sculptures, I would get kind of elaborate, making like tassels and things to hang with the bells. And then I figured out you could put them kind of on the side. So the leather is like the strap. So that was also like, when I wear the masks in the photos, I'm not using those leather straps. I'm like, I have like a shoelace through the back or something bigger that's holding it on my head. But I wanted to show, like, this is a mask that you could put on your head if you wanted to. So the leather is almost just sort of like the decorative strap to show you that it's a mask and not just a sculpture. But then I also like the visual effect of the little bells coming out the sides. It kind of just adds an interesting element. Or then I started playing with hanging them through like, I'll drill a hole and hang the bell down through it. Especially on some of the smaller ones, it makes them look bigger because there's things hanging off of them.
Right.
So kind of as a way to make a very tiny piece take up a little more space. So there's also that element of it.
Yeah. So the thing I like about that is you're really aware of the function of the mask, even like the historical function of the mask is it's not something that, let's say, tribesmen or, whatever term you want to use would have them hanging. They had a function, maybe storytelling, maybe warding off evil spirits. There was always an actual function for these masks, and it wasn't just for adornment for a wall. So I appreciate the fact that you were kind of pushing back, saying, I want to show them in the environment they would be in, because, they are storytelling masks.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Like, a lot of the actual traditional masks that are used, when they're not being used, they're in their own private little living quarters. Like, they're not on display. You're not even supposed to see them if they're not being worn. So obviously mine, like I said, the driving design principles behind mine are not necessarily functionality from like a comfort standpoint. And I have turned down several commissions of people that wanted them like to dance at festivals or like to wear to sing in, because they are very sort of primitive from their like construction aspect, and that like they're not super comfortable to wear. But again, a lot of those real traditional masks are not, they're solid wood, like they're not comfortable to wear, they're hard, they're rigid. So it's not like a foam or a leather mask that is going to like be comfortable to like have on your face for hours. Some of them are more comfortable than others. It completely depends on the shape of the specific piece. They kind of just balance like on your chin and your forehead. So usually I have to wrap fabric or something around myself so you don't see my chin sticking out the bottom, because gourds are very round and a human head is much more oval shaped. So very rarely are you going to find one that actually covers your whole face. And when you do, I have made a few that are bigger than my head, and they're almost impossible to wear because there's nothing for it to balance on. So it's like your face just goes all the way into it and you can't like see. So there's one I have on Instagram that's like a giant green like coyote head, and it was just like, it was bigger than my head, and it was so hard to take a picture of because I couldn't get it forward enough because there was nothing for it to rest against. So some of the really big ones are actually more awkward to wear because they don't fit on your face. But not that one actually, but that one also would be difficult to wear.
Right.
It was an older one. I think it was from last year, but I do really like that one. That was one of my favorites.
Really cool.
Yeah, this was really cool.
That one was part of your recent show at Arch Enemy?
It is, yeah. So in the show, like I had said, it was sort of represented about the seasons of the year. The centerpiece was like a giant sun mask because, it's the solar calendar. And then I made one giant mask that was for each of the main seasons and then kind of filled in with smaller masks in between to create the gradient. So this guy was the springtime mask. So that's why he has those light green colors. He looks kind of manic because he's just waking up and full of energy. This particular gourd, it was sort of that birdhouse kind of shape where it's real round on the bottom and then kind of narrows up into a point. But however it was growing, I think it was laying on its side. So instead of it being this nice kind of smooth pear shape transition, it had almost like a 90-degree angle, which made for a really distinctive like animal snout. So it's fun when you go through the farm and you pick out some of the ones that they discount because they're like flawed actually are the ones that make the coolest shapes when you're looking for a very specific purpose. Yeah.
So talk about this one just real briefly. Like obviously it's springtime. There's a bird coming out of his forehead. What's that represent, or what is it? Just spring?
The bird coming out of the forehead. I've made so much work at this point. Like again, sometimes I just feel like I'm mass producing things in batches, which I think is really helpful as far as kind of really propelling like the evolution of like my style. Just, repetition is the only way that you really like get good at something and evolve something. And so a lot of my work now, it's like referencing my own past work. So instead of just looking up reference photos and looking up like other things to be inspired by, I'm kind of pulling design elements from things that I've made years ago and like revisiting them, or kind of just like I could probably put together a slideshow of like bird heads sticking out of other animal faces on like sculptures that I've made going back for like the last 5 to 10 years. So I think it started back when I was doing the sculptures where I was stacking animals on top of each other, kind of like one body with like 5 different faces on it. And I know I did a little series for like a small works show where I did a series of little animals, and then I paired them up with like a little, whatever the animal was, I had like a corresponding little like bird species sticking out of its head. It was partially just that I was just sticking weird stuff together to see what it looked like. And then I guess more conceptually, you could talk about like birds as being like metaphors for the spirit, like psychopomps guiding souls, or there's the story about like you're in like the Norse Viking longhouse, and there's like a little swallow outside in the night, and that's like before you're born, and then it flies through the longhouse, and that's life, and it's loud and warm and everything's happening, and it's the whole time it's in there, it's going through, and then it goes out back into the night on the other side, and then that's death. So birds is kind of like, I do feel that way I use fish that way too sometimes. It's like they're very familiar, but also kind of alien because their existence is very different from ours in the way that they relate to their environment or that they move through the environment. So they're a little bit otherworldly, even though they're very worldly at the same time.
Yeah. I like this one a lot. This is really cool looking.
Yeah, this was definitely, if I had to pick one favorite piece from the show, it would probably be this one. I just really like the expression. And it's always interesting too, because when you're sculpting it, the clay that I use, it's white. So when I'm sculpting it, it's all just like the brown wood and the brown gourds and the white clay. And then I'll prime the whole thing a solid color so that I can kind of see it just like unified as one form. Sometimes I let the wood stick out. A lot of times I'll prime it and then scrape it back off so you can see like the material surface underneath, but it has more of like a weathered kind of distressed look to it. But then when you add the color, sometimes it really changes the way the expression looks. It's interesting because you don't think it should, because it's like the sculpting didn't change, but sometimes with adding the color, like can really just like change the focal points of the face, I guess is what it is. So it's always sort of like, I know what this looks like, but when I put color on it, it's also sort of a little bit of a surprise to see what it looks like when you dry brush the color over it. Because I'll prime the whole thing dark, and then I'll dry brush the color over it, which is what makes the texture really pop out. So I have a few videos like way back on my Instagram showing me like putting that first dry brush over it, and it's almost like the image appears as you put the color down. So some of them, I mean, I'm usually happy with. Very rarely do I do it and I'm like, oh, I hate it. But this one I thought just had a particularly good face.
Yeah. It's great. How much time, obviously, with this particular show, it sounds like you did a fair amount of research or you had that knowledge beforehand, but do you do a lot of research when it comes to creating these various creatures and so forth?
Depends. Again, like I used to do more research when I hadn't done as many, and depending on what I'm working on, if it's something that I'm more familiar with, like I won't really bother looking at reference photos anymore. I have a photo album on my phone where I'll screenshot things, and I kind of have like, depending on what I'm working on, like I have a bunch of rabbit faces, I have a bunch of like bobcat faces, I have a bunch of I was doing a bunch of frogs, so I have a bunch of frog photos. So depending on what kind of animal I'm working on, I'll sometimes just have the photo album open and flip through. If it's a more like specific piece for a show, which I haven't done a lot of like super specific group shows like that. Sometimes like there'll be a show where the gallery gives you like a very specific topic. Like years ago, I did one at Arch Enemy Arts, and it was mythological creatures. So you could pick any mythological creature from any culture and time period. So I did a lot of reading for that one, trying to like pick out what I wanted to do. But usually what happens is either I'll have the idea right away, I'll have the title in my head like before I even finish the piece, or I'll be halfway through it and I still don't really know where it's going. And then a lot of times what'll happen is like I'll have a little breakthrough as I'm working on it, and then it blows the theme open. Like I was doing a show in 2021. It was a series of masks, and I didn't really have a theme other than I'm making a bunch of masks to hang in the gallery. And then when I started painting them, I was trying to decide like, well, what kind of colors and designs am I going to put on them? And I painted like a star on one that I thought looked really cool. And then I was like, oh, well, I'll look up some star names and I'll like name it after a star. And then that kind of like blew that door wide open. And then the whole show was like all the stars that I could see from my house. I would like all the prominent ones. So all the masks were like embodiments of like the different stars and constellations. So like, kind of finding the theme, doing the research as the piece is being worked on, not so much beforehand. I think that also kind of goes back to the kind of like spontaneity that's required when you're working with found objects, like organic objects. It's kind of like I could do a sketch ahead of time for a show and say, oh, I want to make a mask that looks like this. But then really at the end of the day, I'm going to lay out all the gourds that I have, and it's going to come down to like whatever shape looks the best. Or sometimes I have boxes of sticks that I use for antlers, and I don't know which ones I'm going to use until I lay them all out, and I just have to hold them up to each piece. Sometimes I'll do that with ears too. Like I'll carve wooden ears. I had 4 masks that were all sort of like canine wolf masks, and I carved 6 or 7 sets of ears, and then I just had to hold them up to each mask to see like, oh, this one looks better with tall ears, this one looks better with short ears. But it's just very much like holding it up and seeing the visual. So it's really hard for me to pre-plan that ahead of time, just because it's gonna not look as good as what I kind of stumble upon as I'm working on it. But yeah, that goes for a lot of the thematic research kind of falls that way too, just kind of by like happy accident, I think.
The piece kind of tells you what it wants to be or how it wants to be, right?
Yeah. And like some shows, like I do know like the whole Wheel of the Year theme, like I did have the idea for that show like a year before the show, because the year before that I had done a series of like 4 solo shows throughout the year, and sort of just again from the fact that like as I'm working on things, I tend to make them kind of go along with whatever I'm seeing outside. So when you looked at those 4 shows as 4 batches of work, the colors of them kind of went with the seasons. So by the time I got to the one at the end of the year, I very specifically was making it winter sky kind of colors. So like the one that I did in January, the pieces were all very red and white, like stark, cold, bright colors. And that was the star theme show because it was dark out. I was doing it at night. So it's like this nighttime winter kind of idea. And then my next show was in June, and the pieces were very much more kind of like water themed, like blues and greens. And then I had a show in August, and it was that kind of late summer raindrops, like dark greens and like that deep forest end of the summer vibe. And then I had a show in November that was very like clouds and like winter sky kind of a vibe. So then I was like, I should do a whole show where that's all in one big series. So that was the driving force behind that. So either that will happen where I'll have that theme in mind, and then it was kind of like I really wanted to work on that show because I was excited about it, and I had like 3 other shows I had to do before that. So it was kind of just like, oh, get these out of the way so I can get to the concept that I'm really excited about. Or it'll be like, actually, what I do when I don't have an idea for a show, my partner and I, as a joke, are you guys familiar with Parks and Rec, the TV show Parks and Rec? Yeah. The one character, Andy Dwyer, in that show is always changing his band name. So whenever somebody will like say a phrase, he'll be like, band name. And we sort of off of that, like my partner has like a running list of band names that we come up with randomly when we're goofing around. And some of them will also make good show titles. So we also now keep a running list of art show titles. And when I have a show coming up, because I've had this amazing problem where I've had like too many shows that I don't really have time to come up with like a really deep, long, like evolved research topic for each one. So we just like pull a title from the show title list, and then I make the work like that dictates like the theme of the show, which is kind of a fun way of working at it sometimes.
I love that. You referenced earlier on art school and taking that mask making class. Talk about where you went to school.
Yeah, I went to Alfred University, which is in upstate New York. They're mostly known for their ceramics and glass blowing, which I did neither of. But I looked at a ton of schools. I was really torn when I graduated from high school on whether I wanted to be an art major or like a biology, environmental science major, because the agricultural science program at my high school was like very advanced. It was almost kind of like being at Penn State. The teachers really like created this amazing program. So I was really into environmental science. So when I was looking for schools, I didn't look at a lot of the big art schools because they don't have those other programs. So like, I don't even know an example of one, but a lot of art schools, they're in the city and it's like, they're just art schools. And I wanted to go to a school where I could run track and cross country, where I could take science classes. So that kind of limited like, okay, I got to find a school that has a good art program, but it has all these other things too. And Alfred's really cool because it's a private university. So they have everything, but the art school is actually part of the SUNY, the New York State college system. So within the private university, it's like the state art school because the program is like so big and like well developed. So the tuition's actually a little bit lower if you're an art major versus if you're like a business major or something, which was kind of cool. But so you're in this really huge, great art program, but then you still have access. I was on the varsity track and cross country team. I double majored in environmental science for a couple of years. I ended up dropping it. I started in biology. Biology is very, very much heavily pre-med, which I was not interested in the medical side of it. So I switched to environmental science. The problem, though, is just that art studios and science labs are both like super high credit, high hour class requirements. And for me to get a full double major, I would have had to stay an extra year because I was like overloading credits. And it just got to a point where I kind of just felt like I'm just half-assing both of these and I'm not really throwing myself fully into one of them. And the things that I find most interesting about the science are things that I could just read and like do myself in like the field. So I dropped this. So I probably have like technically have like a concentration in environmental science, but Alfred's art program was pretty wild. It's different than a lot of other schools because it doesn't divide the art subjects into concentrations. So one of the other schools I looked at was Kutztown University, which is actually very close to where I live. Their art school, you can be a fine crafts major, you can be a graphic design major, you can be a fine art painting major. At Alfred, it's this Bauhaus model where everybody who's an art major, you graduate with a Bachelor of Fine Arts. There's no concentration. So in one semester, I can take wood shop, metalsmithing, painting, and printmaking. Like there's no barrier between any of the classes. So part of the reason I didn't do ceramics was because their ceramics program was so big. I felt like unless I fully throw myself into all the ceramics studios, it's not worth just taking like one class. So I kind of did like everything but that, which I sort of regret now. But I do have access to a ceramics studio where I have a studio outside of my house, and my partner actually has a ceramics background. So I am kind of getting back into that more now. But the other cool thing was for an art major, I was taking all the science classes and stuff, but the only real like academic requirements outside of your studios was like art history. So you just took a ton of art history classes. So I think the first one I took was a Art of the Pacific Isles, which was the first time I really had like a non-Western art history class, which like was amazing and just like opened up my eyes to like this style, like this, like I always liked folk art and mythology, and I was like, oh, that's like all of this. And then I really liked the professor, so I basically just took all of her classes. So I did pre-Columbian art, and then she was the one who taught that art of transformation class. So yeah, that was definitely not even so much in school, but after school, I think that influence really stuck with me. Before college, I wanted to be like a scientific illustrator, and I did like very realistic. I wanted to be like a wildlife artist. So there's a Pennsylvania artist, Ned Smith, who used to do a lot of illustrations for the Game Commission. He was sort of like the Audubon of Pennsylvania in like the 50s and 60s. But there is actually like a big community in this area of like traditional wildlife artists. And I definitely like, that's what I wanted to do. And then Alfred, there is no illustration, fine craft kind of mind. Like Alfred is hardcore 100%. Like you're a fine artist or you're not here. So like I did have friends that went into Alfred wanting to do illustration and ended up leaving because like they don't encourage that. And I did struggle in a lot of my classes because my work kind of falls in that weird like I'm not doing abstract oil painting. It's like they thought it was too cartoony, so they didn't really know what to do with what I was making. So a lot of the stuff I made in school, and also like a lot of the assignments they would give you, they would like force you to make abstract work. And as somebody who never made abstract work, like you can't just go from photorealism to abstraction. Like that's a language that you have to develop. You can't just be like, I made this abstract thing. Like it's just random. So I really struggled with that. But then after school, I went, swung from realism to crazy art school abstraction. And then it kind of started to go back the other way. And then I think that's where I kind of landed on where I'm at now, where it's this kind of happy medium between like wildlife art and being inspired by like actual things that I'm seeing and observing in nature, but also kind of putting this like folk art stylized kind of spin on it with a little bit more like concept behind it. So
And if I would have been
yeah.
betting money, I would have thought for sure you were a ceramic artist. I mean, based off what I see.
Well, and it's funny too, because yeah, it's like what I ended up doing, yeah, is very much more like ceramics. The only difference is the clay that I use reacts to water a lot differently than actual ceramics. So when I'm working with the paper clay, like it's like soaking wet. It's like tons of water. And when you work with like actual ceramics, like that just creates like a mud puddle. So my problem is learning how to like dry sculpt. So that's just where I'm just trying to figure that out. But I'm actually really excited. My partner and I have been sort of like brainstorming and gathering the supplies to try. I made a few like of the small masks, and he made press molds of them out of plaster. So we're going to try some press molded ceramic versions of the masks. And then we bought a bunch of like mason stains and glazes that are the same kind of color palette that I use when I paint the gourds. So, and then we're also leaving room for like, I have one that's a rabbit, but it doesn't have any ears on it. So we're just going to leave like little insert spaces in the clay. And then I'll still carve the ears out of wood and then attach it to the clay. And then, you know, possibly have holes in it still for like the bells to hang out or the straps. So it just, in the place of the gourd and the paper clay, it'll be actual ceramic, but the rest of the materials will still stay sort of the same. So I'm really excited to see how that translates. Yeah, I always loved the combination. And the one professor, like when I went into school 100% like drawing and illustration, and I came out of college like a sculptor, and that was primarily because the foundry, like the metal and stone foundry sculpting professor, was the only professor that I had who, what would happen was like you'd go into painting class and it was oil paints, and I had only ever used acrylics and I never even touched oils before. And instead of teaching you, here's how you use oil paints, here's how you glaze, here's how you underpaint, all they did was like throw some kind of high-minded like concept assignment at you and say go, and there was like no technical instruction. So I don't know what I was doing. And then they would say things to me like, you're not painting, you're drawing with the paintbrush. I was like, well, I don't even know what that means. Like what is painting then? I don't know. So the foundry professor was the first teacher that I had in college who said, you know, you have to understand what the material is capable of, and your concepts develop as your technical mastery of being able to make the materials do what you want it to do. Like that will grow. So like the more you know how to do with the material, the more complex of a successful piece you can make. So I was like, wow, that's like so basic, but nobody else is operating from that point of view. So I didn't really want to do foundry work. I never really enjoyed welding or brazing or all the things, but it was also an amazing facility. Like a lot of schools, foundry programs, they do one bronze pour like at the end of the semester. We poured aluminum, iron, steel, stainless steel, and bronze like every 2 weeks. It was wild. He had this crazy, awesome foundry. We were one of the only, like, I think in the entire country, there's only a handful of schools that even can cast steel, and ours was one of them. So it was this crazy, like, harmonic kiln that, like, you couldn't have metal in your body and be in the room while it was heating up. And we did like ceramic shell casting and sand mold casting. So it was all kinds of stuff that, like, I wasn't even really interested in, but I just loved the teacher, and it was so much cool, like, technical instruction. And then when I got out of school, I did do a few bronze castings, but it's insanely expensive and it's extremely like equipment heavy. Like you really need to have a lot of tools, a lot of equipment, a very specialized kind of space, a lot of money, somebody that's going to pay you up front before you take it somewhere to pour it. So that was kind of why I got away from it then. I did do a few like fountains and big outdoor sculptures like right out of school, but I got out of that pretty quick just because it's hard to fund. So I always liked wood carving. My mom's dad dabbled in wood carving a lot, and I had some of his books, and I would always be like as a kid trying to whittle like with a Swiss Army knife, and I cut my finger enough times that my parents finally got me a real carving knife and some wood carving lessons. So yeah, I said then I sort of started stumbling upon like the gourds and the other things that would kind of give you that sculpture vibe, but was lower tech and lower cost. So that's kind of how it went from art school to where it's at now. But I do think just having that like that knowledge of those different sculpting techniques has I wouldn't be where I am now with the style and the materials had I not tried all those different things. So
So overall, good experience.
yeah, definitely. And I did do one summer I stayed and I did like a really accelerated glass blowing class just because I was like, well, I feel like I shouldn't leave here without trying it. And it was definitely not my medium, but it was really fun and cool.
Hmm.
It was definitely a good experience. I don't really have anything to show for it, like from a portfolio standpoint, but I really don't think if you're planning to be an artist for your whole life, like you probably shouldn't really be peaking in college as far as your portfolio anyway. So, yeah, it definitely pushed me out of my comfort zone. I didn't stick around and go to grad school because I was definitely ready to be out of art academia after 4 years. I didn't get along with all the professors, but I will say overall, like I definitely wouldn't be doing the things that I'm doing now had I not been pushed out of my comfort zone and forced to do like weird abstract stuff and be exposed to all kinds of art that I definitely had not seen like before I left home and went somewhere different. So I do think from all of those aspects, it was very formative. Like that's been paying off over time.
Gave you a
Not,
great foundation, it sounds like, and a lot of opportunity to experience a lot of different things.
yeah, absolutely. It was definitely, I think that was the biggest thing was just so many techniques and just access to stuff that I just didn't have access to before, or that I just wouldn't even have known to try to get access to. Like it would never have even occurred to me. Oh, I could go like carve a boulder and like weld something and stick it onto it. Like that just would never have occurred to me before. So not that you have to go to art school to be a successful artist. I know a lot of people that haven't, but um, I do think it's extremely helpful to just go somewhere different. And even if you come back and end up in the same place, I think it's very important to just, have some like outside experiences because it's going to change everything.
Yeah, it's going to inform what you currently do. Even if you go back to the same thing, it's going to inform it in a different way. Like you said, maybe it's introducing different materials or a different style or different technique. Would you say like an important lesson for, let's say, a high school kid that's thinking about going to college is like really doing the research of what they want to end up with and looking for specific schools that offer that? Or was it just because the serendipity of the university you were at that really led you here?
Um, I think it depends. Again, like for me, I would not have minded a school that had a little bit more of like an opportunity to explore like illustration. I have considered like if I ever did go back to grad school, I'd probably go for that because that was something that I didn't get that I was interested in that was just very much like not part of the curriculum there. But the other things that they had there that I did really want, partially just from a facility standpoint, partially from like the curriculum standpoint. It's tough because it's like I thought I knew what I wanted. And then obviously when I got there, I was like, I don't want this. But then after the fact, I was like, well, it actually was really helpful to get me somewhere that I would never have found otherwise. So I think there's a quote, I think it's Louis Pasteur, chance favors the prepared mind. That was something that we had to learn in ag science. So I think the best thing that you can do is have an idea, but it's not carved in stone. Like, prepare yourself as much as possible, do your research, but also like be open to if something unexpected comes up, or if something catches your eye that wasn't on your radar, like check it out. You never know where it's going to go. That's actually, I mean, that's even how I got into Arch Enemy. It was just, I happened to be in the right place at the right time and jumped on a very serendipitous chance contact and ended up like launching my art career. So I think you have to put yourself in the position where you sort of know what you're looking for, but you're also open to like, just, you're going to miss the opportunity if you're not like in the headspace for it, but you might not necessarily be able to predict what it's going to be. So
That's great advice.
Yeah.
Outside of this foundation, this ability to experience a lot of different things, do you think Alfred University prepared you to be a professional artist? Did they give you the tools to run a business as an artist?
um I think my sculpture professor, Glenn, Glenn Zweigert, he actually retired my senior year, but he still runs a studio in the area and works with students a lot. He specifically, I think, very much focused on that and would talk to us about, when you set up your own home studio, like he introduced us to things like Harbor Freight, where you can buy really expensive tools, and would show us like, okay, here's like the local lumber mill where you go if you need to buy. He would take us on like field trips where we'd go to like a hardware store and buy, and like had us all buy like certain kinds of hammers, like just basic stuff that's like, here's your like studio toolkit. And he would talk about, when you go on a trip, about he would talk about like writing things off as business expenses, like you can make anything like an art related business expense. And so he had a lot of really helpful practical advice. I don't think that was necessarily common throughout all the classes, and I certainly didn't get that from a lot of my other studios. But again, one of the reasons I ended up taking half of my classes in a medium that I wasn't really super interested in was for the teacher, because he did have a lot of that. But definitely a lot of that was kind of found out the slow hard way after graduating.
Right.
My dad is an accountant, so that was also super helpful.
Tenant wants to acknowledge our media sponsor, New Magazine. That's N-U-E. You can follow both the national and the Denver edition of New Magazine on Instagram. The national edition can be found at new_magazine, and the Denver edition at new_Denver_magazine. And I want to share with you something very exciting. Check out the newly launched New Denver Gallery Guide. Look for the signage that says New Denver Gallery Guide that has a QR code. Scan it with your phone, and you have instant access to a comprehensive digital guide to Denver's finest galleries and exhibitions. Find this QR code in your favorite gallery, hotel, or coffee shop as you visit and explore Denver. Thanks for listening.
I'm Kristen Egan, and you're listening to the Tenant Podcast.
So before you had this opportunity with Arch Enemy, did it take a while to get your art life going to become a professional artist and do the work that you're doing?
It did, yeah. So I graduated from college in 2007. I applied for a whole bunch of artist in residency positions because I was like, well, I guess that would be the next step, is like I'll try to get like a residency somewhere. But they say they're looking for emerging artists, but they're looking for emerging artists who have a little bit more of like a unified style and a portfolio. And at that point, graduating from college, I was still very much trying to find my style. Like my portfolio was like collage, metal, stone skull, like it was all over the place. So I did not have like a super recognizable, like to me it all kind of fit together, but to somebody that was just looking at it as a portfolio, like it was all over the place. So I got rejected from everything I applied for, moved home. It just so happened that a big art center had opened up near my parents' house while I was away at school. So they were hiring like a cashier job, which I actually got rejected for. But then the gallery person, the gallery technician left like right at the same time, and they called me back and actually offered me the gallery position, which was a way better job. From a training standpoint, not necessarily from a financial standpoint, but so I worked at the Goggleworks Art Center in Reading, which it was an old like safety goggle factory that they converted into art studios. It's based on like the Torpedo Factory in Alexandria, Virginia, just like a big renovated warehouse. So it has artist studios, it has a movie theater, it has galleries. It actually has a ceramic studio, a hot glass shop, like a woodworking, like a wood shop, like a metal, like jewelry smithing. I think they just added like a welding metal shop. Actually, it's funny, one of the big benefactors who funded it, because he funded like the glass blowing, also was a huge benefactor, Alfred alum. So we had like the Miller Performing Arts Center at Alfred, and there's also a Miller Performing Arts Center in the city of Reading, right across the street from the art centers. So there was a lot of weird coincidental Alfred tie-ins, and a lot of the staff at Goggleworks are also Alfred grads, which like some of them I was in school with. Now I'm old now, and they're all like way younger than me. So we never met, but they'll be like, "Oh, when were you there?" Oh, never mind. So I'm like 15 years older than everybody now, but yeah, it's I worked in the gallery for like 2 or 3 years, just until basically like I was living in my parents' basement, making minimum wage, running 3 gallery spaces. So I'd be like, this isn't going. It was a nonprofit, so it's like you're never going to get a raise. It was like 2008, so there was like huge economic turmoil. So I quit. I did get a residency, but it was really just more of like an artist retreat. So it was basically like a woman's property that was an artist who lived like north of Scranton, like rural Pennsylvania. And they turned her property like into a house where artists could go and stay and work on things. So I left the gallery. I did a little artist retreat there. And then I was just a substitute teacher for a long time, just because I was trying to find a job that was like kind of flexible, where I wasn't going to get locked into like working full time, so that I could still have time to make art. So for a while I was substitute teaching. I did happen to know the art teachers from a few different school districts in the area. So I did get to be kind of like the go-to art teacher substitute around the county. And then a couple times I was like, I would sub whatever, but the science and art teachers usually would call me up. And then my mom is like an early childhood educator who also does a lot of like freelance, like she would teach homeschool groups. And then sometimes we would do like art workshops or sort of like in-service day, like art projects with kids. So I would do a lot of teaching with her. And then the whole time I would vend more like kind of craft show, art show kind of things. Now we're up to like 2011, 2012. And I was doing, local craft shows, local art shows. And then it just sort of occurred to me, like, this isn't going anywhere. I need to try to get somewhere bigger. Philadelphia is an hour and a half south of here. That's a city. I should try to show work in a city. So I found a show in Philadelphia. It was an animal themed art show. So I was like, oh, perfect. I have lots of weird animal sculptures. I got into the show. That's where I met. So that gallery was also functioning as like the printing press for all the other galleries in Philadelphia, or at least in the area of Philadelphia. So while I was setting up my piece for the show, some other people came in to pick up the postcards for their gallery, said they liked my work, gave me their business card, left. So then that show happened, and I didn't really make any great connections at that gallery. So then instead of just taking my work home, I called up the people who gave me their business card and just said, hey, you said you liked my work. Can I take it over? Can I bring it to you guys? Which is not how you get into galleries. Now I would not recommend doing that. You're just going to piss people off. But it just worked out. They had just opened up. They were a photography gallery called Gallery ML. And they did a lot of those. I think they were doing it where like the nude model that then gets like body painted, and then they do like photo shoots of them. So that was the main kind of like topic of the gallery. But then they had this little side room where they had just started showing like paintings and sculptures and just kind of non-photo stuff that they thought was cool. And the gallery was on Arch Street, so they were calling it Arch Enemy Arts, was like the little like side project. And they had a show up it was just a photography show, and they let me just dump my sculptures onto the floor in the middle of their photography show, just like on display. And then like right after I made that connection, like they like really blew up, and they closed down the photography side because the photo sales had kind of been drying up in the wake of like smartphone photography and filters. And the arch enemy part of the gallery like really took over. And so I just happened by lucky chance to be with them like since they've opened. So pretty much every other gallery that I've ever been in up until the last couple of years, everyone has found me through Arch Enemy. And then Instagram has really blown up the last couple of years. So I think now I'm starting to get invites via Instagram, but for like a decade, it was just because I was in there. So yeah, it worked out well for everybody, I think.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So I would say now to a young artist, like, don't just show up and say, here, take my stuff. Like, galleries have protocols for how you enter work. Usually they'll have an open call show where you can submit pieces, and then that's how they find new artists. So an established gallery will have very specific spelled out submission requirements. So don't just try to drop your work off. It was like the Wild West though, so it worked.
I was going to ask you how important Instagram is to your business model as far as selling art. And then you obviously touched on the fact that, you know, people have found your work on Instagram, like it, and then you get invited to various exhibitions.
Yeah. I didn't have a smartphone I was kind of late to the game. So I didn't have a smartphone or Instagram until it was probably like 2015 or so. So Instagram had already existed for a while, and you know, it started slow when you make an account and you have 0 followers. And what I would do when I first started, whenever somebody would like one of my photos, I would just follow them. And then sometimes they'd follow me back. So now I follow like 5,000 people. Most of them I probably don't want to be following, but I have to go through and like clean it out. But I just, you know, I was just started posting what I was working on. And then it sort of becomes an art medium in itself. Like as you make posts and play with the filters and like, oh, it's like photographing the work, like making the posts and composing the photos becomes kind of like a fun thing. Then when I started getting into making the masks and like photographing myself wearing the masks, because the galleries are not interested in displaying photographs, Instagram really has become like the display venue for those action shots of the masks. So if I didn't have Instagram, like I don't know where else I would put those photos, because most of the galleries that I show in are not interested in photos. So it kind of is like its own gallery in a way. And there's definitely like work like that I'm not showing anywhere else except on Instagram. So it's sort of like I've sort of gotten into photography as a medium, like via social media. Like I didn't do photography, but now I consider that like part of the work. And I have started playing around with painting again, which I've had so much sculpture work and demand that I kind of stopped doing a lot of illustration and painting, but now I was kind of wanting to get back into that. And I've been doing little paintings of the photos that I took of me wearing the masks for Instagram. So it's all kind of like feeding into itself as far as like I made the sculpture, then I did the photo of the sculpture. Now I'm doing a painting of the photo of the sculpture. So it definitely has helped me kind of in the development of my own work. And then, you know, also as I'm putting it out there, like I had a pretty steady growth of followers. And then it seems like it's kind of this self-feeding, like the more followers you get, then the more people see your work, and then like the more, so it's this kind of exponential curve of like, I had a pretty decent following, and then all of a sudden within like the last maybe 2 or 3 years, like it's really skyrocketed and taken off, which is awesome. But also I find myself now having to like be a lot more thoughtful about the posts and what I'm sharing in the posts. Not that I'm trying to gatekeep what I'm doing, but I do feel like in some ways, like the technique is my style in some ways. Like it's not, I'm not just general oil painting techniques and like making specific pictures. Like the entire technique is something that I've sort of developed, and like that is my style. So I've had a lot of people ask me questions about what I'm doing, and I try to answer them. And then sometimes I feel like a jerk for being like, don't ask me. But like I'm not like, I'm selling things right now. I'm not really interested in teaching things right now. Not that I want people to see how I'm doing it. I want you to understand, because I do feel like people can like appreciate and engage with the work more if they understand how it's made. But then I also don't want to see like a flooded market of people copying my stuff. But at the same time, like that's super flattering. So it's this weird double-edged sword where I never know how much to share or not share. And then sometimes I'll kind of push back at people and then feel bad about it. So the more followers you get, the trickier it gets to navigate.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's certain things that it's taken you a long time to put to practice, right? Experimentation, exploration. You're willing to share some of that stuff, but it's not like you're here instructing people step by step how to do it. And people got to realize that you're supporting yourself with your art. So that first and foremost is what you need to concentrate on. And if you have time and you have a ton of followers, so to answer any questions or anything like that, I can see why it's a thin line that you have to walk to try to be accommodating and nice to people, but at the same time, people need to understand like, hey, I'm busy too, right?
Yeah. And it's also tough too, because there's just that whole like, you lose the tone in the typing. So I might take something the wrong way, or somebody else might take something the wrong way. It's just, there's all that kind of remote communication issue. But I think overall it's been pretty great. And I do think like I did make like an FAQ post that I put in my story highlights, because again, it's not that I don't want to answer everyone's questions, but a lot of times I get the same question. Like I could spend all day answering the same question 50 times, and it's just like, I'm sick of typing it out. Or somebody will say something like, is your work for sale? It's like, the first thing that I do when I see an artist that I like is I go to their website. And maybe I take that for granted because I'm an artist and I understand how that works. And I get that it's like this like spur of the moment excitement that you see something, but it's also like there's a lot of basic information that you can find for yourself without making the person type it all out for you.
Yeah.
So
Do you
again, I'm
do
not trying to be a jerk.
do your
But
due diligence and do a little
yeah,
Googling. It doesn't
yeah,
take much, right?
yeah. So yeah, it's always a funny fine line of dealing with that. But overall, like I said, I've met so many artists that I would never have met before, or like work that I would never have seen before. There's like a great kind of artist community on Instagram. The last couple of years, I've been getting like fan art drawings of some of my posts, which is wild, and I love that. So yeah, so it's cool. And again, there's the fine line of like people are starting, like I've seen a few people like tattoo my stuff, and like some of them ask me, and then some of them don't, and they just make tattoo flash and put it out for sale, which again, there's like this weird, that's maybe not cool, and I need to start selling tattoo tickets. But I don't want to totally discourage it, but it's just trying to straddle that line of, this is my livelihood, let's like respect somebody's design, but also thank you. So yeah, it's a mixed bag, but overall I would say it's definitely one of the main reasons that like my art career has been successful up until this point. So I'm not going to complain about it too much. I definitely get more benefit, I think, from the social interaction with all the other artists. I've gotten to know people really well,
Yeah.
like remotely, that like we would never have met in person.
So what compels you to create and do the work that you do? Would you still be creating and making masks, creating sculptures if you weren't making money doing it?
I think so. I probably wouldn't be doing it at the quantity that I'm doing it now. There's for sure an element of I have a deadline. I'm completely unmotivated and exhausted, but I have to sit down and crank out a bunch of work. Whereas if I was just doing this for pleasure, I would just be doing it when I had an idea and I was excited and had some free time and was just like tooling around at home at night. Like I always was crafting, and my mom said my mom's an early education teacher who specializes in art and music. So I have been, making arts and crafts like since before I could talk. So I've always been compelled to be crafty and creative. Yeah, I think it would just be like the intensity level would probably not be quite so high, but it would be there. Yeah.
How do you go about selling your art? Is it mostly through these galleries that you have relationships with?
Yeah, when I started out, it was mostly vending, and then when the shows started to pick up more, I'm definitely in this great place right now where I just have so many gallery shows scheduled out that it's a struggle to fill the show requirements. So I have zero inventory like outside of the gallery at this point. Um, it sort of simplifies things for me in a lot of ways because instead of having to ship things out to 50 different people, I just have to put it all in one box and give it to the gallery. And then they have to ship it out to everybody. And so, the gallery takes a commission, but I'm setting that price point and they are getting me advertising. They are getting me like, a collector list. They're shipping the work. They are doing a lot of the tax stuff on their end so that it's a lot simpler on my end at the end of the year. So there's like definitely a lot of benefits to that. They're setting up the show. I keep telling myself like at some point this like gallery streak is going to slow down, but right now it's like I'm just trying to ride this wave while the demand is there. So I have shows. I'm booking into 2026. So
Wow.
I have too many shows, which is awesome. So we'll just see how long that lasts. And I guess if that starts to slow down, I would probably think about maybe like a Patreon or something. I have a huge waiting list of commission requests that I've been crawling through super slowly because every time I have another gallery come up, the commissions have to get set aside. So I have a lot of super patient people that have been waiting for things, but it just gets to a point where you only have a certain amount of time and energy in your life. And when you're excited, like I could spend all of my time doing commissions. And honestly, like the commission requests that I'm getting, they're not asking me to do weird things outside of my body of work. Like it's very much open to my own interpretation, like kind of making something like that's in the vein of what I'm already making. But I don't know. I kind of want to, I feel like I've been mass producing the same thing for a few years now. And I have some ideas and I want to try to get a little weird with things and kind of branch out a little bit. Not that I'm not going to, they'll still be masks, but I have some new ideas I want to try. And I think if I tie myself too hard to commissions, what ends up happening is they sort of start pulling me back into like recreating things that I made 2 years ago instead of pushing forward and making the ideas that I'm excited about making going forward. So I try to every now and then throw a commission out when I can get to it, but the gallery shows are nice because the sales are still there and I'm just making whatever I want to make and not trying to make something to like meet a request that somebody else has.
So do you have an inventory of stuff that you currently have for the gallery openings over the next 2 years?
No.
No? Okay, that was
No.
a quick answer.
Yeah, I've been again, amazing problem to have. the last, gosh, probably for the last several years, all of my shows have sold out, which is awesome and like more than I could have ever expected or anticipated. But also it means every time I have a show, I have to start again from scratch. So there is nothing getting pulled that I can like save and put onto the next show. So it does become like, that's why I there's an element of fine art, but there's also a huge element of like fine craft and like production mode. So I do sort of almost like feel like a ceramicist in some ways, like throwing out 50 pots, because I just have so much, like so many deadlines coming up, and I have nothing to pull from. So I have to make, like, it all has to get made all at once. So actually the Wheel of the Year show that I did, I actually ended up hiring somebody to help me finish it because it was too much work and not enough time.
Right.
So, people have suggested I do that in the past, but I've had interns when I worked in the gallery. And it's always, usually I just end up coming back and having to fix what the intern did. So it's like, if someone does that on one of my pieces, like, it's ruined. So that's just creating more work. But I happened to have a friend who had that art center, Goggleworks. I did end up going back, like just back in like 2019 and working in the gallery again briefly. And I do have a studio there. I don't work in the gallery anymore, but so I have a home studio, but I also have like a public studio that's just nice to not have your entire house be filled with art materials. But one of the other studio artists there has actually worked like as a professional studio assistant. So it got to a point where I did all the sculpting, and then she's like, I basically hired, she sanded everything, and then we both primed everything, and then I kind of laid them out, like she did the color blocking for me. So I'd be like, paint these white, paint these yellow, paint these green, and she got it to the point where I could just go back and do all the like fine like detail painting. So that was awesome. That show would have been like half the size had I not had somebody to do all that. Like, I mean, it's not really grunt work. It's still like requires a definite level of like technical skill, but yeah, that was like a lifesaver. So she has moved away, so I'm kind of bummed. I don't know if I'm going to be able to hire her to help me again. But it was great. It was a great experience, like being able to trust somebody else to like work on your stuff. That was interesting. But the shows that I have coming up are probably not going to be that big. That one just sort of had to be so big out of necessity of like getting the theme across, because like the quantity of like, you had to get the whole year in there. That was like part of the theme, was like the mass, like the size of it. So
Yeah. Well, Jeff Koons has a pretty good model because he comes up with all the ideas, and then he has people painting for him and creating things, and then he comes in and has them correct their mistakes. So yeah, it's a model that works, and he's been doing that for years. So how many pieces do you typically have in an average showing? I know it's going to vary. This last one was a lot, but in number I'm trying to get at is like, how many pieces per year are you pumping out to fulfill all your shows?
per year, I have to add it up. I would say I shoot for at least a dozen pieces in a show, give or take. It could be anywhere from, I think it was 2022. I had 4 solo shows, and the first one, I think there were like 14 pieces in it, and they were all pretty big. And then the second one, I had about 12 or 14 pieces. Some of them were like, I think I had maybe like 12 masks and then a couple smaller pieces. And then the third show, there were like 9 pieces, maybe 10, and then maybe 10 or 12. But some of them, again, it was like they were like 8 big masks and then a couple smaller pieces. And then the last show of the year, I think there were like 9 pieces total. So the shows kind of shrank as the year went on, and I got more and more burned out.
Right. Yeah.
And there's always also like I'll have little random group shows kind of in between there. So like I always do the enormous tiny art show at Nakata Gallery in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. So it's like a small art show, but you have to make 6 pieces for it. So like that got thrown in. And then I did like the small works show at Fine Art Gallery. I think I sent 2 pieces there. So scattered amongst the solo shows where it's a big batch, I'll throw little like 1 or 2, small little pieces off to the group shows too. And then occasionally I'll actually finish a commission and that'll be in there too.
What do you price your art at roughly? What's the range that you sell at?
That's been such a weird learning curve. I've been inching it up every time. So when I started showing work at Arch Enemy, I think I was selling stuff for like $200, $250. And then as stuff started really selling out, I keep inching it up because it's like, well, if it sells out, it's affordable. So let's go a little higher. So I've been inching it up and I still haven't hit the ceiling yet. I would say the average piece is in the 600 to 800 range. But I've really been pushing like some big elaborate pieces this last year. So I have actually sold a few pieces like upwards of $2,000. I think I might have done one for 2,800 was the most expensive piece I've sold so far. So some of the big masks are now like in the 1,000 plus range, depending on the size of them. So it's exciting. It's like, see how high. I do like the idea of like I want it to be accessible. I've had like really faithful collectors that have been following my work from like when I didn't really have much of a following, and they have a lot of my old pieces. On one hand, people are like, don't feel bad because now the stuff that they have is worth more money because all your stuff is I was like, yeah, well, that only matters if they want to sell it. Like right. If it's like worth more money or not. But yeah, it's like on one hand, I want to keep it accessible. On the other hand, I do get very sleep deprived and burned out, and it needs to be sustainable. So if I cannot be living in poverty, I will take it.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah. Like I'm not selling things for like thousands of dollars. So yeah, I think it's in the upward end of some of the galleries that I'm in right now. But yeah, I would say I'm hovering around $1,000 or so, kind of in that zone.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So would you consider yourself a perfectionist?
I would say I'm less of a perfectionist than I used to be. And now it sort of depends on how desperate I'm rushing towards a deadline, how much of a perfectionist I'm going to be. Although I will say I have gotten to the point where, again, just from like the sheer repetition, I have figured out a lot of shortcuts or things that I can do if I'm in a hurry where I might know like, oh, there's like a more detailed, better way to do this, but like no one else is going to notice. So there's definitely some cheats that I can take that I'm better at now than like that used to take me a lot longer. Or even stuff like when I put the bells onto things, like that used to take me forever because I'd be playing around with the threads and how to do this or that. And now I just know like this will work. I don't have time to mess around with it. Just do it this way. So I want to start like experimenting again a little more because I sort of feel like I've gotten to a place where I've found the things that work and I'm usually in a hurry and I'm starting to do the same thing over and over again. And I need to change it up before it gets stale. But again, like, that's me. Like when I tell that to other people, they're like, oh, I don't think that at all. So I don't think anyone's sick of it yet, but I also think that obviously you find things that work and find things that sell and follow that if you're trying to make a living at it. But I also think like the work that I'm making 2 or 3 years from now shouldn't look like the work that I was making 2 or 3 years ago. Like I should be evolving. So
yeah.
Which I think it has. And I'm happy where it's at. And I'm not going to like do something weird just for the sake of doing something different, but I would like to, try out some ideas that I have.
Absolutely. You talked about having a home studio and then you have a public studio at Goggleworks. Do you think it's important to have a separate like work and home life?
I think in some ways it's hard for me because I always struggle with time management. And usually what happens is I will start working on things kind of leisurely, and then it will get closer and closer to the deadline until I'm just pulling like 14-hour days, staying up, pulling an all-nighter like the day before I have to drop everything at the gallery, and like this mad rush, because no matter how much time I have, that's how long it's going to take me to finish a piece, because I will keep poking at it and playing with it until I just can't anymore. So I've gotten a little better, but there definitely still is an element of like, no matter when the deadline is, the week before the deadline, I'm going to be scrambling. And then I'll drop everything off at the gallery, and then I'm exhausted. And then it takes me a little bit of time to kind of get the momentum going for the next batch, because it's like, I'm sick of doing this, and now I got to do exactly all of that all over again starting now. So it's, for me, having a home studio has been very necessary because I'm usually up super late at night doing a lot of the work. And two, part of that, I think, I feel like when I'm sitting at my desk and like the sun's coming over the mountain and it looks beautiful outside, and I feel guilty, like I feel like I should go for a hike or something. And when it's dark out, there's no distractions. Even in high school, I was always a night person, because it's like, that's when I can just sit down at my art desk and focus, and I don't feel like I need to be like out in the world doing something else. Like, this is the only thing there is to do right now. So my partner is very much on the opposite sleep schedule of me, so it becomes really difficult me staying up till 3 in the morning, and he has to wake up for work at like 4:30 in the morning. So having the studio not in the house, I think in some ways was more just to accommodate his needs. But also, I do think there is something to be said for not having your entire living space be your workspace, and trying to have more of that work-life balance, I think, is important. And as I get better at the techniques and have more of a grasp on how to make things happen faster, again, I think there's benefit to approaching fine art with a little bit of that craft production mode, because it allows you to kind of streamline like your making process, and to have more free time because of that. And also there's like a practical aspect of like the last show that I did for Arch Enemy. My house is really small, so it's this like little cinder block. It was a hunting cabin that I bought on Craigslist, and we renovated it. So it's like 500 square feet, and it has an upstairs, but it's like, it's like an attic kind of like loft. So it's just like a one room cabin. So my art table is in the corner over here and has but I'll just lay pieces on the floor when I'm not working on them. Or like if I want stuff to dry fast, I'll lay it in front of the wood stove. There were so many pieces from that last show that like they wouldn't have physically fit in my house. They would have been all over the floor. There would have been nowhere to walk. So I had to do it. So thank goodness I had another studio, because they wouldn't have all fit in my house. So I ended up pulling a lot of late nights in Reading getting ready for that show, because I had to have a bigger space. They also have a really nice wood shop there. So usually what happens when I work at home is that when I have to sand something or carve something, I have to do it outside on the porch. And sometimes it's winter and it's freezing. And I actually have a funny photo of my January solo show from 2 years ago. I don't think I ever posted it, but I had to sand all of the pieces and paint them. And it was completely dark out. It was like 20 degrees out. So I had a bunch of clip lights out on the porch. I had like 4 layers of clothing on. And then I could sand for like 5 minutes until my fingers went numb, and then come in and like run them under hot water, and then go back out and sand again. So having somewhere that has like a wood shop with a dust collection system that's indoors with heating is like a game changer.
That's awesome.
Talk about suffering for your art.
No doubt.
Yeah, I've been there. Yeah.
Oh. I know you do other things that are very artistic. You're a musician, and you play bagpipes. How long have you been playing the bagpipes?
I started taking lessons, I think I was like 28, around there, late 20s. So about 10 years ago, I would say. So I'm 38 now, so I would say it's been about, yeah, 10 or 11 years. My mom's parents are from Scotland, so neither of them were bagpipers, but my grandfather was in the military, so I have like his like uniform bonnet and a couple things. And so I always had Scottish stuff around growing up all the time, and I always thought the bagpipes, you either love them or you hate them, basically. There's no in between.
It's
And
true.
and I always loved learning weird instruments. Like I took piano lessons for years as a kid, but like I always loved like I have one of those like wooden like Native American flutes and tin whistle and a concertina, and I would always just mess around with random instruments. And I happened to be living near like the local bagpipe band, and found out like that they just give you free lessons, which I guess is how that's how bands perpetuate themselves, because nobody knows how to play the bagpipes unless you specifically are like joining the band. So they'll teach you for free how to play. So I was like, heck yeah, I'm going to learn how to play the bagpipes. And it just so happens like, I played piano for like my entire childhood up through high school. I can maybe pluck out some songs, but like I could never perform publicly. But the bagpipes, it's a really steep learning curve, but musically it's actually a lot simpler than most other instruments. It's only one octave, so there's a lot less notes to learn. So most of what you're learning is just weird like muscle memory. And I always tell people it's like 90% instrument maintenance and 10% musical ability. It's a very like finicky instrument physically, but you can relatively, compared to other instruments, you can go from not knowing anything to performing publicly in like a relatively much shorter period of time. So,
See, I would have thought it was like very difficult to learn.
Yeah.
there's competition. There are like official like bagpiping associations where you register, and like there's official bagpiping competitions, and it's very technical. And it's a very like grade 4 is like beginner and grade 1 is like professional. And like grade 1 and 2, you basically will never get to unless you start playing when you're like, a kid, because there's so much ingrained like muscle memory that like as an adult, it's almost just physically impossible to get to that level. But I'm not a competition piper, so it doesn't matter.
The one funny thing is like, anytime a person's learning to play, like I tried to play saxophone when I was in high school or elementary school. And the learning part is you sound horrific, absolutely horrific. And your parents are like second guessing why they ever agreed to give you lessons. So, and bagpipes, when you're starting, when you're filling it with air and starting, they sound like, a herd of cats, right? So, how is beginning bagpiping sound compared to, let's say, saxophone learning?
It's painful, but it's interesting what you don't know until you start learning. The part of the bagpipe that your fingers are on that's playing the notes, that's called the chanter. And there's actually a little double reed inside that, like an oboe. So when you're learning, when you're going from 0 to just starting out, you actually have what's called a practice chanter. So it's not the whole bag, it's just that part with a mouthpiece over it. So it's kind of like a recorder or like a whistle or something, but it's a reed inside the mouthpiece that you're blowing into. So you're just learning the fingering on this kind of like duck sounding recorder, and it's much lower volume. So it doesn't sound pretty, but it's not like, a herd of cats yowling at you. So you learn the fingering, you learn the scales. The way that our band does it is you get about 5 or 6 tunes like totally memorized to the point where you don't have to think about the notes, because then you plug it into the bag, and then you're starting back at square one all over again, because now you're trying to figure out how the bag works. So the bagpipes have 3 drones, which they just drone a solid note. So the 2 smaller drones are playing the low note on the chanter, and then the big drone is playing the same note but 1 octave lower. So You put corks in all the drones, so you just get the feel of the bag. The bag is sort of like your third lung that you're filling up with air, and then you're squeezing it with your arm, and it's blowing the air out of all the different, because all the drones and the chanter all have reeds in them. So you need the bag because you can't put 4 reeds all in your mouth at the same time. So the bag is blowing the air through all the reeds. And so you just figuring out the breathing rhythm is then like, so it takes usually like 6 months to a year to learn the chanter. And then it took me another like 3 months before I could get a song out like on the actual bag. And then as you get comfortable with it, again, it's like, it's better to just practice for like 10 minutes a day. Like spending hours on it, you're just going to exhaust yourself. But then you take out one of the corks, and then you get that drone going, and then you take out the second cork. So you adjust slowly to the airflow. Because if you've never done it before, like you just try to blow up the bag and play, you're just going to black out. Which again, it's funny too, because when you know what you're doing and when the instrument is working properly, you should not be blowing your brains out. Like you should be breathing comfortably, but it's, if you don't understand the rhythm of it, like you're not going to catch the air in the bag, and you're just going to like pass out. So the best part of it was when I got to that stage, that's the horrible stage, not the chanter learning, but when you plug it into the bag, that's the horrible cat yowling stage. Because the real chanter reed is like 20 times louder than the practice chanter reed. So just the chanter alone is horribly loud. And then you have the drones. And at that point, my Scottish grandmother was basically deaf. So I would stand in front of her and play, and she would just go, "Oh, that sounds wonderful."
That's
and
awesome.
my parents would be like in the other room, like, "Oh my God." So she liked it.
Is this a nice like activity to do outside of what you normally do? Just like a nice way to kind of decompress and do something different and
It is, yeah. I've always liked playing music, and like in school, I'm the oldest of 3 siblings. It's my brother and sister, and I all have kind of similar talents. They went more like the music and theater direction, and I did do like band and chorus, and like I would do like the musicals in high school, but playing music for me is usually like the go-to when I'm procrastinating on not making my artwork in the studio. So it's like I feel like I'm still being productive, but I'm actually not. But yeah, I joined the pipe band just for fun. So that the trade-off is they give you free lessons, and then you commit to doing like the parades with the band. So we do, St. Patrick's Day parades and Halloween parades and like Memorial Day stuff. And then there were a few people in the band who were closer to my age. And then after the St. Patrick's Day parades, like they'll go out to the bar and like kind of busk at the bar. And that really kind of took off to the point where now the bars are like calling us ahead of time and like booking us out. So it's actually in March, I'm like a full-time bagpiper, and we work almost every weekend. It's funny, like where I live, like Reading, Pennsylvania, it's very like Pennsylvania Dutch. But if you go a little bit north into the coal region, like that's where all the bagpiping happens. so we basically like tour all around like Schuylkill County. It's the one town we play in. It's where, have you ever heard of Yingling beer?
no.
Oh, maybe that's hasn't made it out west yet. Never mind. It's America's oldest brewery.
Oh,
Okay.
nice. Well, that's
Interesting.
interesting.
Yeah, the one town that we play in, Pottsville, it's like where the Yingling Brewery is, and yeah, we go all around all different places. They're mostly like crazy little dive bars, but it's great audiences. Everyone like knows that we're coming now because we've been doing it for a couple of years. So that's like my income for the month of March usually is bagpiping. So it's not something that I thought I would be doing for money. I really just did it because I like weird instruments, and I thought it would be funny to learn how to play the bagpipes. But it's a very lucrative like side gig. Like I do a lot of funerals and occasionally weddings, and I've gotten to it's weird to go to funerals of people that you don't know, and you get to like hang out with like the funeral home employees, and like I have some weird, crazy, like it's funny. You get into the bagpipes will get you into the most bizarre situations. So if you ever just want to have a lot of weird experiences, you should learn how to play the bagpipes.
Nice.
So what's the weirdest experience that you've had?
Weirdest one. Well, I have talked myself out of a few checkpoints by agreeing to like bagpipe at like police like wreath laying ceremonies. Maybe we shouldn't say that. I think the funniest, weirdest thing was I was doing a lot of times I don't know who the funeral is for because they call and they say they want a bagpiper. I don't know who it is. I don't know. Like sometimes the family hires me, sometimes the funeral home hires me. I did this one. I didn't know what it was for. It was a viewing at the funeral home and they just wanted me to stand outside and play and then do a song like at the service. It turns out it was like the girlfriend of the leader of like a really big motorcycle gang that's like semi-notorious in the area from like years back. So I bagpiped like this. It was like this huge biker funeral, and everyone was like, it was like 3 hours of people like rolling in their vests. Everyone was like super nice to me. It was fine, but it was like really wild. And I had to keep taking breaks because you can't play the pipes for 3 hours nonstop. Like your mouth muscles get tired and they fill up with condensation because it was cold out. So a couple times I had to stop and go in and take breaks. And the funeral director was like, "Oh, you want a drink?" Like sort of joking. And I was like, "Sure." And he was like, "Really?" And he got all excited. I was like, "Yeah, I'll have a drink. I'm the bagpiper. Like, let's have a drink." So he's like, "Oh, come back here, come back here." And he takes me back through the funeral home into like the casket display room where like everything's like out for people to like pick the samples. And he opens up a desk drawer and pulls out like a bottle of Jim Beam and is pouring it into Dixie cups. And he's like, "We can just drink in here. Everyone gets cremated now, so no one buys caskets, so we can just drink back here." So like drinking whiskey in the casket room.
Oh man.
Awesome.
One of my like most favorite bagpipe gigs.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so lots of weird stuff happens, but
No doubt.
it's usually pretty funny.
I was going to ask you before, but I didn't want to assume. I just got the gist. But you said that you can be a little bit of a procrastinator. And so outside of maybe going for a hike or playing the bagpipes, what are some of the activities that you will do in your procrastination?
Playing the ukulele is my other big procrastination go-to. So it does pay off though, because I made a video wearing a mask playing the ukulele and it went totally viral and like blew up my Instagram account. So procrastination can pay off if you play it in the right way. So yeah, I said playing music is a big one. Reading is a huge one. I actually don't read like a ton anymore. As a kid, I was always reading, and when I get really into a book, like I'll just abandon all of my actual required jobs that I'm supposed to be doing because I get like completely fixated and obsessed on like I have to find out how it ends. So I have a hard time putting them down. So I oftentimes don't get into a book because I know that will happen. But then what happens is instead I'll try to find little short things to read, like on my like I'll just be like, "Oh, I'm just gonna have lunch and I'll read like fan fiction and stuff because it's like just like a weird short little like it's like junk food." But yeah, reading and music are probably or like hiking or I have a day job where I work at a gym, so it's not so much procrastination, but something that sometimes it's hard. Like I used to be, like I said, in college, I was actually like a competitive runner. And then for a few years after college, I was coaching and like racing. It's like the science and art conundrum. It's like they both are extremely time demanding. And one of them has to give if you're going to really do a good job at the other one. So like there was a time when I would go out and like do a 3-hour trail run. And I just don't have time to do that anymore. I said, I I have a day job where I just work at the gym like part-time. It's nice. It's like super flexible. It's great for me just to have a little side cash flow coming in. So like if I have a gap between shows, or just so I don't have to panic, like what if this show doesn't sell out and then I have no money? So it's nice to just have a little backup. But then sometimes I'll stay, like, I should be working out too, because that's also the reason that I'm here at the gym. So like then I'll stay and work out. And that if you actually do like a whole workout, like, that's like another hour or two on top of the time that I'm already there working my shift. So then that kind of cuts into the studio. But I just try to remind myself that that's important to do, and it's not procrastinating.
Right.
It's
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
It's self-care, you know?
Yeah. It's been fun. I've been learning a lot more. I was a member of the gym before I worked there. It's very close to the house, so it's convenient. I had breast cancer a couple years ago, and I had a mastectomy, and not that it matters, but like just for me, like trying to get back into like getting my range of motion back, feeling good, like I just felt like if I don't start like toning up and getting back into some kind of physical routine, I'm going to get really disproportionate really fast now that post surgery. So I actually like learned how to squat and deadlift, which I had never done before. So it is kind of fun, like learning how to do like other kinds of exercises that I've never tried before.
It sounds to me like you've been a lifelong learner. Like you have a lot of different interests.
Yeah, I would say that's accurate. um, I don't know. Do you want me to expand on that?
If you want to, I mean, I just think it's interesting, people that are compelled to create also seem like they have a lot of like other interests outside of whatever their main focus is, right?
Well, and I do think that it sort of is a requirement. Like at some point, if you're making art and you're not doing anything else, then what is the art about? If you're, and I guess you can be one of those people that's like, my paintings are about the paint. But, if you're doing anything else, I think like you have to have life experiences to have something to be creative about. So you do have to kind of like fuel that by doing other things. So
I think that's a key word right there, fuel.
Yeah.
That's just what I tell myself when I'm doing something that's not in the studio. Feel better about not being in the studio.
Yeah.
I'm going to pull up another piece here. This is an actual sculpture, and it's a fairly new one, I think. This one here.
Oh, yeah.
Hail the Divine Boo Book. Talk a little bit about that.
This was definitely a little bit outside of my comfort zone. So one of the galleries that I've been showing with for the last couple of years, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing this right, Fine Art Gallery they're in Melbourne, Australia. I did their small works show for a few years, and then they invited me to do a solo show. I'm going to have another solo show this year in July. And the owner of the gallery is also a really amazing artist and has made these sort of like kind of Frankenstein, like baby doll creatures. So he made this thing called the toddler pillar, which is this like multi-armed like baby doll, and then teamed up with another artist, I think, who was like a comic book artist, and they made like a comic book about these toddler pillar creatures. And then they made like a toy, like a vinyl casting version of one of them. So it's like a blank face. It has 6 arms that you can like pop out and rearrange. And it comes in a bunch of different colors. So they did a group show. Actually, I think they did more than one group show where they sent the toddler pillars to a bunch of artists. I think some of it was invite, and then some of it was like, it was an open call where like you could just order one and design it and like enter it in the show. So they basically it was like a custom toy show. So they basically wanted you to take this vinyl figure and then like customize it however you wanted. So it was definitely not something that I would have done like on my own, but the gallery reached out to me and asked if I would do it. And I thought it seemed kind of fun. And I actually have done sculptures in the past that have multiple arms. So like it isn't totally outside of the forms that I'm used to working with. I was a little nervous about working with the vinyl because I wasn't sure if like the paint and everything that I use, like I thought maybe I'd have to use like enamel paints and stuff, which I don't really enjoy using. Um, Not that they're not cool. I don't have the ventilation for a lot of that stuff, and that's part of the reason I use water based and like wood and things because I don't like making plastic and I don't like having plastic dust. So, but it ended up actually being a lot easier to work with than I thought. And so instead of using the paper clay, I used like a 2-part epoxy clay, which I actually have used in the past. And it was kind of funny because I was like, oh, well, I'll use like Epoxy Sculpt or Magic Sculpt is another brand. So it's like this A and B and you mix it together and then you have like 30 minutes before it like hardens so you can sculpt it. And the last time I used that stuff was like several years ago when I was still in the style where the sculpting was very smooth. And then I painted all of the details onto the surface. But I forgot that. And when I started using this and I started sculpting like that, the white like fur, and then as soon as I started doing it, I realized I've never used epoxy clay and carved the hair texture into it. So that was like a crazy kind of little like, oh crap, I thought I knew how to do this, but I actually don't. But it did eventually turn out okay, but this took me forever. But I was really, really happy with the way it turned out. So
Yeah, it's very cool.
it's funny because it's definitely something that I never would have done without prompting, but it ended up being one of my favorite pieces that I made this year. So also, I think it was the thing that sold for the most money that I've made,
Wow.
which was also exciting.
Yeah.
But it did take much longer than my usual stuff because of the difference in the materials.
And then this is the piece that really wowed me down at Keel Fine Art. This one's called Wildcat. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I was really happy with this one too. This was another one of those weird, like flawed shaped gourds, but I knew it would be a good kind of like feline cat face because of the way it has the kind of like juts on the cheek, and it had like just enough of a like a spout out the front of it that would be like the depth for like a cat face. Lately, when I carve the ears on things, I've been just doing kind of like straight triangles. So I started getting a little curvier with the wood carving shape. Um, and the ear tufts that are sticking out of the ear is something that I had done on a few pieces like years ago early on that I liked, and then just sort of like didn't forget about it, but just like I wasn't working with horsehair and just hadn't done it in a long time. And then I thought it would be a really cool finishing detail on this piece. So the ear tufts coming out the top are actually little bundles of horsehair that are drilled into the wood. And then he has kind of like a Krampus tongue going on because it was December, and I was getting ready because we had a potential gig to do like a Krampus night with the bagpipes at a bar, but then it got canceled at the last minute. But I was in Krampus mode, so that's why the tongue. But the photograph that I took of this one of me wearing it is also like one of my favorite like mask wearing photos. I was really happy with the way this guy came out.
It's so cool.
It is. Yeah. It's really cool.
Well, and the theme of the show, I thought the title for that show was so cool, like Guardians of Feral Lands. Where I live, there all the land around here is state game land. So it's all like fairly public access, like hiking trails. And right across the street, like I have a dirt driveway. Right on the other side of the driveway, there's like this big like rock ridge. And before, not since I've lived here, but the neighbors told me that a few years before we bought the place, that there was a bobcat that had a den on that ridge, and it had like its little kits, like little baby bobcats running around on the rock ridge, which would have been super cool. And I've never seen it, but I did see a bobcat run across the driveway one night when I was driving home. So there definitely are still in the area, and I thought that was so cool because they're like super super elusive and you rarely if ever see them. So when I was thinking of like kind of mystical guardians of like the forest around here. I was like, oh, well, that would be a perfect creature to use. So, and I know bobcats are usually more orange, but the one that I saw run across the road looked very white, and it could have just been because it was washed out in my headlights. But I tried to kind of use that kind of ghostly white color in it.
We're in a new year. What are you looking forward to, and what shows do you have coming up?
I am, I guess, looking forward to successfully getting all my shows finished in time. I am also looking forward to bagpiping season is coming up, so we'll have lots of fun, like concerts and gigs coming up in March. Um, yeah, I have a ton of shows, so if I can think of all of them, I'm doing the enormous tiny art show at Nakata Gallery in New Hampshire. I think that'll be the coming up like in February. So I'll have 6 like small pieces for that. And then I have it's sort of a solo show. There's an art center. This one's kind of a weird one. It's an art center up in Homer, New York. So it's a little bit south of Syracuse. I think it's just called like the Homer Art Center. The woman that runs it used to run a gallery in Binghamton where they had given me a few shows like way back when I was just getting started. And they've asked me to do a show at this art center in Homer. And I was supposed to do it in 2020, and then COVID happened and it got canceled. And then I was supposed to do it in 2021, and I had breast cancer and had to postpone it. And then it got pushed back like 4 times. So I'm doing it in March, but it's a very different kind of an art space. It's not a sales driven style gallery. It's more like a performance venue, music venue that happens to have a big gallery space. So there's no physical way that I'm going to be able to make enough sculptures to fill their room. So I'm actually in the process of printing out a lot of those photos that I've taken. So this is finally the first opportunity that I've had where I'm going to be able to display all of those photographs that I've taken on the walls. And then I'm trying to be really efficient and make a few pieces, because I think if I don't put them out on Instagram, nobody's going to know they're there and they won't sell, and I'll be able to use them later on in the year at a different show. So I might put some secret masks there. But that show's going to be up in Homer on display for like 3 months, I think, starting in March. And then I have a solo show at Fine Art Gallery in Australia in July. And then I have a solo show at another gallery I work with, Higher Art Gallery in Traverse City, Michigan in August. And then I have a solo show at Arch Enemy Arts in Philadelphia in November. And I might have a couple other little group show pieces scattered in there.
Wow.
I know there's definitely at least one, but I don't think I'm allowed to announce it yet. So there's going to be a secret cool one.
Nice. We like secret cool ones.
Yeah, that'll be coming up sooner rather than later. But I don't think I'm allowed to say anything yet.
Well, it sounds like it's going to be a really busy year.
Yes, I'm a little worried about it, but we'll see what happens. Like I said, it's an amazing problem to have, so I don't want to complain about it. And I'm trying to use this opportunity at the nonprofit gallery to be really efficient about like how I structure, like pre-planning ahead so that I can use some things later in the year. So like my show in November at Arch Enemy, I think I want to do kind of revisit like the winter theme, because I had a few pieces that I had started for the Wheel of the Year that I had to just abandon because of time constraints. And I thought it would be really cool to finish that and just do more of like a winter themed show. But then the problem is, if I'm doing that show in November, it means all the pieces have to be finished in October, which means if I try to photograph them, it's going to look like fall and not winter outside. And sometimes you can cheat that by like finding someplace where there's like just sky and you can't see any trees, but that's kind of hard to do around here. So I think what I might try to do is make some of those pieces now, put them up in that nonprofit center, but I can photograph them while it still looks like winter, and then have them for the end of the year. So that's my working goal, but we'll see if it happens or not. See how many I can get done.
Right.
It'll happen. It's just a matter of like, will they all happen? So it'll be a fun adventure.
Because you have no inventory and all the inventory, everything that you're making is going towards these shows. What's the best way if people are really interested in getting a piece, buying a piece of yours? What is the best way to go about that?
Most of the galleries that I work with do what's called a collector's preview. So you can go to the gallery and like physically buy artwork at the gallery, but usually like the day before the physical opening, they will send out an email to whoever's on the list, and it's like the online sales page. So you kind of like are able to buy things online like the day before it's open and available in the gallery. And it's free to join the collector's preview list. I know some people are like, oh, I'm nervous about it. There's no obligation to ever purchase something. All it does is if you send an email to the gallery and say, please add me to the collector's preview, all it does is it just puts you on their mailing list. So nobody should be shy about doing that. The best thing to do is just send an email to the gallery saying, please add me to the collector's preview list for Kristen Egan's upcoming exhibition. And then whenever I have a show there, you'll be on the mailing list when they send out the link. And there is a list of all the upcoming shows on my website under the shop page. And I believe I have all the gallery names like linked to the gallery website. So you should be able to find the emails by just clicking on the gallery website. And there is actually instructions in the FAQ on my website of like how to get on the collector's preview list. So that's definitely the best way at this point to try to snag something. Although I will say things have been selling like insanely fast on the preview. So if you do sign up for the preview, the gallery will tell you ahead of time like what time that the email is going out. There have been a few technical issues in the past, but for the most part, like you have to check the email right when it goes out because it's been like very fast sales, which again is awesome. But I know some people have been getting frustrated because they keep missing it because they're at work or something. And I wish that I could make enough pieces to fill all the commission requests, but you know, I got to hire more help.
Anything else that you want to talk about or promote before we let off tonight?
I think that was the full list. Yeah, I really appreciate you guys looking into my stuff and having me here for an interview. I hope it was interesting.
Oh,
It was
interesting.
very interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And I learned a lot. So I appreciate that. And I love your work. I love the whimsicalness of it. And can't wait to see what else comes out. So I'm looking forward to this next year and all the way into 2026. So
Appreciate it.
yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate you spending the time that you did with us this evening, especially considering the time difference because it's starting to get late in your neck of the woods. But you said you're a night owl, so I guess we're all right.
I had some coffee, so we're good.
Appreciate all your time that you spent with us away from your partner and anything else that you had going on this evening, work or what have you. And I look forward to checking out some of these exhibitions that you're a part of in the coming year, or this year, I should say. Hopefully, I'll get to see your work again in person sometime in the near future.
Yeah, I definitely would love to send more stuff out west. I've shown a little bit out in Santa Fe at Keep Contemporary. I think Valerie maybe shows there too. Or Joanna, I think maybe Joanna said she has work out there. Anyway, Keep Contemporary is like a cool gallery out in Santa Fe. But yeah, I was excited to be at Kiel because that was the first time I showed work in Colorado. So
Yeah, that's awesome. Remember to follow Kristen on Instagram at Kristen Egan Art and check out her stunning work at her website, KristenEgan.com. As always, you can find all this and more in this week's episode notes for the Tenant Podcast. I'm Todd Pearson.
And I'm Wes Brown.
Have a great week.